In the bitter depths of the North Sea, where waves rise like mountains and fate turns on the edge of a blade, a young slave girl plunges beneath the icy waters, but death refuses her that day. Ran, the ancient queen of the drowned, reaches up, through centuries of darkness, and pulls her back to the world of the living. When she emerges, her eyes burn with divine fire, her voice carrying the weight of ancient runes. The slave traders who betrayed her will soon learn that some souls return stronger than steel, wielding the very storms as weapons. This is not just another tale of revenge. It's a saga of how the sea itself chose a daughter, and the price of betrayal is paid in thunder. But can even the gods' chosen one escape the curse of vengeance once it takes hold? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bone comb's teeth caught in her hair as her mother worked. Through the tangles, each stroke accompanied by stories of their ancestors. The intricate carvings depicted waves and ravens, worn smooth by generations of touch. "Astrid," her mother would say, "our blood runs with the tide." Back then, she hadn't understood the weight of those words. Their village of Ravenhavn perched on the edge of a fjord like a gull's nest, where the mountains kissed the sea. The air always tasted of salt and smoked fish, and the sounds of boat builders' hammers echoed across the water from dawn until dusk. Astrid knew every splinter of every dock, every hidden cove where the seals would sun themselves, every patch of cloudberries that grew sweet in the brief summer months. Her father was a fisherman who read the waves like runes, teaching her to spot the subtle signs of weather changes in the way seabirds flew and how the foam gathered at the water's edge. "The sea provides," he would say, "but she must be respected." Each morning she would watch his boat disappear around the headland, and each evening she would be the first to spot its return. The comb became hers on her 16th name day, passed down with solemnity and pride. Her mother's hands shook slightly as she pressed it into Astrid's palm. "Our women have carried this since before Harold Fairhair united the kingdoms," she said. "Each nick tells a story, each worn spot holds a prayer." That night, as Astrid ran her fingers over the ancient bone, she imagined she could feel the whispered hopes of all the women who had come before her. 1 week later, the raiders came. They arrived in the false dawn, when the fog lay thick upon the water. Their dragon-headed ships emerged from the mist like monsters from a nightmare. The warning horn sounded too late. Astrid was at the shoreline, checking her father's nets as she did each morning. She saw them first as shadows, then as death made manifest. The raiders moved with the practiced efficiency of wolves culling a herd. Smoke rose from the mead hall before the village had fully woken. Screams shattered the morning stillness. Astrid ran, but not toward safety, toward home, toward her mother. The comb was in her apron pocket, weighing like a stone. She found her mother in their doorway, an axe in her hands. "Run!" The word came with such force that Astrid stumbled backward, but she couldn't run, wouldn't run. Her fingers closed around the comb as a raider's hand closed around her arm. Her mother's axe fell, blood sprayed, but there were too many. Astrid saw the blade that took her mother's life, saw how her body crumpled like a discarded cloak. The comb's teeth bit into her palm as she clenched it, drawing blood that mixed with her tears. They bound her hands with rough rope that chafed. Her wrists raw. Other captives were gathered, young women mostly and a few children. Some she knew by name, others only by sight. All wore the same mask of terror. The raiders sorted them like cargo, speaking in a dialect she half understood. Words like price and market cut through her grief like knives. Her father's boat returned as they were being led away. She saw him on the water, too far to help. Their eyes met across the distance. He raised his sword, started to turn his ship toward shore. Astrid shook her head frantically. There were too many raiders, too well armed. She couldn't bear to watch him die, too. The last sight of her village was flames against the morning sky, smoke staining the heavens black. The comb remained clutched in her bound hands, its carvings pressing patterns into her flesh. Each step down the beach felt like walking into a darkness deeper than night. The raiders' ship waited like a great beast, ready to swallow her whole. As they rowed away from everything she had ever known, Astrid pressed her mother's comb against her heart and silently mouthed the prayers carved into its surface. She was no longer the girl who had woken that morning to check the nets. That girl had died with her mother in the doorway of their home. What remained was something harder, something that grew with each beat of the drums, that drove the oarsmen forward, with each wave that carried her further from Ravenhaven. She would survive, she would remember, and one day she would return. The trader's ledger lay open on the captain's desk, its pages filled with neat columns of numbers and names. Torchlight caught the fresh ink. Girl Norse, 16 summers. Value, 30 silver pieces. Below that, a note. Blue eyes, unmarked, suitable for nobility. Astrid saw this glimpse of the book when they first brought her aboard, before they shoved her into the darkness below decks. She didn't know then that those stark lines would determine her fate. Captain Grimolf was a man who believed in order. His ship, the Sea Wolf, ran with the precision of a water clock. Even the beatings were methodical. Damaged goods, fetch no price, he would say, checking his ledger, before deciding how many lashes a disobedient slave should receive. His eyes were the color of tarnished coins, and his beard was braided with silver beads that clicked together when he spoke. The hold stank of fear and filth, and too many bodies pressed together. Chains rattled in the darkness like angry ghosts. Astrid learned to measure time by the changing of the guards, by the thin shafts of light that penetrated through the deckboards above. She learned the languages of suffering, how different people from different lands cried out to different gods. Among the captives was an old woman from the eastern steppes, her face mapped with wrinkles deep as sword cuts. She spoke Norse with an accent thick as honey, telling stories in whispers when the guards were far away. The sea has power, she would say, and the sea has memory. It remembers every drop of blood spilled upon it, every tear that falls into its depths. Astrid still had her mother's comb, hidden in her hair where the raiders hadn't thought to look. At night, she would run her fingers over its carvings, reciting the names of her ancestors like a prayer. Each name was a link to who she had been, each prayer a reminder of what they had taken from her. The first mate, Eric Blackhand, noticed her defiance. He was younger than the captain, with eyes like chunks of ice and hands stained black from handling tar ropes. "This one has spirit," he said one day, grabbing her chin. "Spirit fetches a good price, if properly broken." His grip left bruises that lasted a week, but they couldn't break her. When they tried to make her sing for their entertainment, she sang funeral dirges. When they demanded she dance, she moved like she was performing death rites. The old woman from the steps saw this and nodded in approval. "You carry storm in your heart," she whispered one night. "Storm and sea together. Dangerous mixture." The ledger recorded everything. Astrid learned this from fragments of conversation overhead. During her rare moments above deck, 3 slaves lost to fever, their values written off in red ink. A girl from Alba who jumped overboard, her price deducted from the crew's shares. Even the food they were given was measured and recorded, just enough to keep them alive, not enough to give them strength. 2 weeks into the voyage, during a storm that made the ship groan like a dying beast, Astrid saw her chance. The guards were distracted, seasick and stumbling. She managed to work her way to the captain's cabin, drawn by some instinct she didn't understand. The ledger lay open, illuminated by flashes of lightning through the window. In that stuttering light, she saw the truth of her intended fate. Sail to a nobleman in the southern lands, a man known for buying young girls and returning to the market months later for replacements. They caught her there, of course. Captain Grimolf himself found her with the ledger in her hands. "Curious little raven," he said, his voice soft with malice. "Did you really think knowledge would save you?" He picked up the ledger, closed it with deliberate care. "Tomorrow, we'll see. How well you swim. That night, chained in the hold and waiting for dawn, Astrid pressed her mother's comb to her lips and made a final prayer, not to the gods of her childhood, but to the sea itself. The old woman from the steps watched her with knowing eyes. "The sea listens," she said. "Always the sea listens." Dawn came with fog and bitter cold. They brought her above deck where Captain Grimolf waited with his ledger. "Record this," he told his scribe. "1 unit of cargo, discarded due to insubordination. Full value to be recovered through increased prices on remaining. Inventory." Then he nodded to Eric Blackhand, who grabbed Astrid by the shoulders. The last thing she saw before they threw her overboard was the ledger, its pages fluttering in the wind like the wings of a trapped bird. The chains dragged her down into darkness. Seawater rushed into her mouth, bitter cold and tasting of ancient deaths. Astrid kicked against the weight, but the iron links only pulled harder. The surface grew distant, a shifting mirror of grey light that seemed to mock her struggles. Her mother's comb slipped from her hair, tumbling into the depths like a falling star. Time stretched like honey dripping from a comb. Each heartbeat lasted an eternity, each pulse growing weaker than the last. The cold crept into her bones, into her very soul. Strange lights danced at the edges of her vision, the death lights her father had warned her about, the ones that lured unwary sailors to their doom. But these were not death lights. They were eyes, 9 pairs of eyes in the darkness, glowing like pale moons under water. They belonged to the daughters of Ran, the merfolk who dragged drowning sailors to their mother's hall. Astrid had heard the stories since childhood, how Ran cast her net for souls, how she kept a palace of bones and treasures in the deepest trenches of the sea. Now those stories swam before her, terrible and beautiful, a voice like the tide. Itself whispered in her mind, "Your heart beats with such fury, little one, such rage, such hunger for justice." The Sea Queen emerged from the shadows, her form shifting like smoke in water. Her hair was a tangle of seaweed and silver, her skin the color of pearls in twilight. Her gown seemed woven from the scales of 1,000 fish, each one catching light that shouldn't exist so deep beneath the waves. In her hands she held a net of gold. "I have watched you," Ran said, her voice somehow clear despite the water. "Watched how you kept your pride even in chains, how you sang death songs to mock your captors, how you reached for knowledge even knowing it might doom you." A smile curved her lips, revealing teeth sharp as shark's teeth. "You are already more than human, Astrid Eriksdotter. Would you be more still?" Astrid tried to speak, but only bubbles emerged. Her lungs burned. The world was growing dim. "Your mother's comb," Ran continued, gesturing to where the treasured item had fallen. One of her daughters retrieved it, holding it reverently. "Carved from the bone of a whale that swam these waters when your ancestors were yet unborn. A queen's gift, though your family had forgotten that part of the story. It marks you as one of mine." Through the pain and encroaching darkness, Astrid felt something stir in her blood. Ancient memories, perhaps, or ancient magic. "I offer you a choice," the Sea Queen said. "Die here and come to feast in my halls until Ragnarok, or take my pearl, become my agent in the world above, and bring justice to those who treat lives." Like numbers in a ledger, she held out her hand. In her palm sat a pearl the size of a child's eye, glowing with an inner fire that pulsed like a heartbeat. Within its depths, Astrid saw visions, storms that could shatter ships, waves that could swallow cities, winds that could tear the very souls from men's bodies. Her vision was fading, black spots dancing before her eyes. Yet in that moment of choosing, Astrid saw with perfect clarity. She saw every indignity she had suffered, every cry she had heard in the hold, every cold calculation in the trader's ledger. She saw her mother falling, her father's helpless rage, her village burning. She saw the old woman from the steps, nodding as if she had known this moment would come. With the last of her strength she reached for the pearl. The moment her fingers touched it, the sea itself seemed to pause. The pearl dissolved into her palm like moonlight into water, spreading through her veins like liquid fire. The cold vanished. The chains that bound her crumbled to rust. Power surged through her body, ancient and terrible as the ocean itself. Her eyes snapped open, now burning with the same inner light as the pearl. She could see through the darkness, as if it were brightest day, could feel the currents and tides as extensions of her own body. The 9 daughters of Ran circled her like a crown of stars, their song vibrating through the water. Sister, sister, storm-bearer, wave-walker, justice-bringer. Rise, Ran commanded, her voice rich with satisfaction. Rise, and remember that you are no longer merely human. You are my chosen, marked by the pearl, blessed by the sea. Show them what becomes of those who think they can own the children of the waves. Astrid rose. The water parted before her like a curtain, lifting her toward the surface on a column of foam. She could feel the sea wolf above, could taste the fear that would soon spread across its decks. In her hand, her mother's comb hummed with new power, its carvings glowing with the same fire that now burned in her eyes. She had died as a slave. She would rise as something else entirely. The storm came first, as a whisper in her blood, then as a roar in her bones. Astrid rose from the waves on a pillar of sea foam, water streaming from her hair like liquid silver. The pearl's power coursed through her veins, teaching her body secrets older than the first tides. Above, the sea wolf wallowed in suddenly. Heavy seas, its crew scrambling like ants as the sky darkened. Thunder answered her heartbeat. Each breath drew lightning from the clouds until the air crackled with potential violence. She raised her hand, feeling the elements bend to her will, and watched as a bolt of lightning struck the water beside her. Instead of dispersing, the electricity gathered, solidified, transformed. What emerged was a blade of pure stormlight, its edge crackling with the same fire that now burned in her eyes. "Impossible!" she heard someone shout from the ship's rail. It was Eric Blackhand, his face pale as a fish's belly in the stormlight. "We killed you. We sent you to the depths. The depths sent me back." Her voice carried like thunder across the waves. The storm blade hummed in her grip, eager for what was to come. She felt its hunger, its desire to unleash the fury gathered within. But first, she needed to understand its power and her own. She swept the blade in an arc, watching as it left trails of lightning in the air. Each movement felt natural, as if she had trained with such a weapon for 1,000 years. The pearl's knowledge flowed through her, teaching her forms and stances that no mortal swordmaster had ever dreamed of. When she thrust the blade toward the sky, a bolt of lightning answered her call, striking the sea wolf's foremast and splitting it like kindling. Panic erupted on deck. She heard Captain Grimolf's voice rising above the chaos, ordering men to battle stations. Crossbow bolts flew toward her, only to be swept aside by walls of water that rose at her thought. The sea itself was her armor now, responding to her needs before she could even form them into conscious desires. She tested this new protection, letting the waves carry her closer to the ship. More arrows came, and with them thrown spears and axes. None reached her. The storm blade sang in her hand, deflecting what the waves missed, leaving trails of electricity that transformed the projectiles into ash. But it wasn't enough to simply defend. She needed to attack, to understand the full scope of her new abilities. Astrid reached out with her free hand, feeling the currents beneath the ship. With a gesture, she called up a massive wave that lifted the sea wolf's stern high into the air, leaving its bow pointing toward the depths. Screams of terror mixed with the groaning of timber and the snap of ropes under sudden strain. "Please!" The cry came from below decks, the voices of other slaves still chained in the hold. Their fear cut through her battle fury like a knife through silk. She had forgotten them in her initial rush of power. Forgotten that not all aboard were enemies. Control. She needed control. Astrid took a deep breath, forcing the storm to obey her will rather than her rage. The wave gently lowered the ship, back to an even keel. The lightning retreated to a distant rumble, though her storm blade remained solid in her grip. She could feel its disappointment, its desire to unleash destruction, but she was its master. not the other way around. She lifted herself higher on her column of water until she could see the entire deck. Captain Grimolf stood by the helm, his ledger clutched to his chest like a shield. Eric Blackhand had drawn his sword, though his hands shook so badly she doubted. He could use it. The rest of the crew were pressed against the rails or huddled behind whatever cover they could find. "Watch!" she commanded, her voice carrying to every corner of the ship. She raised the Stormblade high, then brought it down in a precise arc. Lightning followed its path, striking the water in a perfect circle around the Sea-Wolf. Steam rose where the electricity met the sea, creating a barrier of boiling, water that none could cross. "This is but a taste," she told them, letting them see what she had become. Her hair floated around her face, crackling with static electricity. Her eyes blazed like twin stars, reflecting in the polished metal of her blade. "I could end you all with a thought. Sink this ship and everyone in it to Rand's Hall. But first, you will free those below. Then we will speak of justice." The Stormblade hummed in agreement, its light pulsing in time with the Pearl's power. In her blood, she had died as a slave named Astrid. She had risen as something new, something that needed a new name. Let them call her what they would. Stormbearer, Wavewalker, Justice Bringer, she would answer to them all. But first, she would show them exactly what it meant to face the wrath of the sea itself. Captain Grimolf's ring glinted in the stormlight, a heavy gold band carved with serpents that ate their own tails. It marked him as a member of the Traders' Guild, a symbol of authority that had sentenced countless souls to slavery. Now it trembled on his finger as Astrid stepped onto the deck, her Stormblade casting blue-white shadows across the rain-slicked planks. "The keys," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the timber groan. "Now." The captain's hand moved to the ring instead, twisting it as he had done countless times when weighing the price of human flesh. "You don't understand the complexities of our business," he said, his voice struggling for its usual authority. "There are agreements, contracts." The Stormblade flashed. A finger's width of the helm beside him turned to ash. "The keys." Eric Blackhand moved first, fumbling at his belt for the iron ring that held the keys to the chains below. His hands shook so badly he dropped them, the metal clattering on the deck like bitter laughter. One of the younger crewmen darted forward to retrieve them, then froze as Astrid's gaze fell upon him. "Go," she told him. "Free them, all of them." The boy ran below decks. Soon, the sound of chains falling echoed up through the hatches, followed by weeping prayers and the shuffle of weakened bodies ascending to freedom. The old woman from the steps was among the last to emerge, her knowing eyes finding Astrid's transformed figure with no surprise at all. "The sea remembered," the old woman said in her honey-thick accent. "As I told you it would." Astrid nodded to her before turning back to Grimolf. "Your ledger," she commanded, "the one that measures lives in silver." The captain clutched the book tighter. "This is the record of legitimate business transactions, protected by—" Lightning struck the mainmast, close enough that the captain's beard stood on end. He thrust the ledger forward with shaking hands. Astrid took it, feeling the weight of all the suffering it represented. With a thought, she called water from the air itself, letting it soak through the pages until the ink ran like tears and the carefully recorded prices dissolved into meaningless stains. "Now the ring. This is my badge of office," Grimolf protested, but his voice had lost all strength. "Handed down through 3 generations of honest merchants." "Honest?" The word cracked like a whip. "Shall we ask the children you've sold, the families you've torn apart, the lives you've reduced to numbers in your drowning ledger?" The Stormblade pulsed with her fury. "The ring, or I take the finger with it." The gold band slipped off easily enough, despite his reluctance. Astrid held it up to the lightning's glare, reading the inscriptions of false authority, the marks of a guild that had turned suffering into profit. With a flex of her new power, she reshaped it, the gold flowing like water until the serpents transformed into breaking waves. She turned to the freed slaves who had gathered in a huddled mass near the bow. "This ship is yours now," she declared, sliding the transformed ring onto her own finger. along with everything in its hold. Those who wish to return home shall be given safe passage. Those who wish to join me in bringing justice to others like him," she gestured to Grimolf, "are welcome to stay." "And what of us?" Eric Blacken's voice quavered. Around him the crew shifted nervously, weapons lowered but not sheathed. Astrid looked at them each in turn, reading the mix of fear and calculation in their eyes. Some had shown small kindnesses to the captives, smuggling extra food or loosening chains that had grown too tight. Others had reveled in their power over the helpless. Her new senses could taste the truth of their souls like salt on the wind. "Choose," she told them. "Join. My cause face judgment here, or try your luck with the waves." Her stormblade brightened. "Choose wisely." In the end, most of the crew chose to join her, fear and pragmatism overcoming whatever loyalty they might have felt to their former captain. Those who had been cruelest threw themselves on her mercy, begging forgiveness she was not yet ready to give. As for Grimolf himself, she had special plans for him. The transformed ring hummed on her finger, resonating with the pearl's power in her blood. It was more than a trophy. It was a symbol of how power could be reshaped, redirected, turned from a tool of oppression into an instrument of justice. She had taken their symbol of authority and made it her own, just as she would take their ships, their routes, their very network of corruption. The storm was no longer just around them. It was within her, growing stronger with each beat of her transformed heart, and this was only the beginning. The harbour master's map lay across his desk like a net cast to catch secrets. Its parchment was worn at the fold lines, stained with wine and marked with careful annotations in multiple hands. Trading routes were drawn in different coloured inks, black for legitimate commerce, red for the paths where human cargo changed hands in the night. Astrid stood before it, her stormblade concealed but humming beneath her cloak, while behind her Grimolf knelt with his hands bound. "I don't share guild information with outsiders," the harbour master said, his jowled face flushed with indignation, "even if they arrive with unexpected companions." He glanced nervously at the former captain. "Tell her," Grimolf croaked. "Tell her everything." The harbour of Kingsport spread below the window, a forest of masts swaying in the evening tide. Somewhere in that maze of ships and shadows, the renamed Sea Wolf, now Storm's Justice, waited with its crew of freed slaves and reformed raiders. But the true power lay here, in this room that stank of ink and fear, where the threads of the slave trade were mapped and measured. "The guild has rules," the harbour master protested weakly. "Procedures." Astrid let her eyes flash with the pearl's fire. A small demonstration. The water in his wine cup rose like a serpent, then froze, solid, cracking the fine glass. "I am not interested in your rules." The harbour master's face went from red to white. His hands trembled as he reached for the map, beginning to point out locations. "The major routes are here, through the Danish Straits, but the secret ones, the ones for special cargo," his finger traced dotted lines that wound through treacherous waters. "These coves here, where the customs officers are paid to look away. These islands where they hold the auctions." Each location burned itself into Astrid's memory, resonating with the power that coursed through her veins. She could feel the currents that connected these places, taste the salt tears that had been shed along these routes. The pearl's power let her sense the truth in his words, and the lies he tried to hide. "You're omitting something," she said softly. The temperature in the room dropped until frost formed on the windows. "The northern route, through the fjords." The harbour master swallowed hard. That's not marked here. Too dangerous, too many raiders, too many storms." "The storms are mine now." She placed her finger on the map, leaving a small burn mark. "Show me." As he sketched in the hidden route with shaking hands, Astrid felt the old woman from the steps shift behind her. They had brought her as an advisor for her knowledge of the trade's eastern connections. Now she spoke in her honey-thick accent. "There, you see how it curves past the witch rocks? That is where they gather when the moon is dark. The traders." "Conclave," Grimolf muttered. where the big contracts are made, where they decide who gets what territory, what quotas. When? Astrid's voice carried the chill of Arctic waters. 3 days hence, the harbour master whispered, with the new moon. Perfect. Astrid studied the map's markings, memorizing each inlet and cove. The pearl's power let her feel the sea routes, as if they were extensions of her own body, channels, through which justice could flow like a tide. Her transformed ring clinked against the desk as she leaned forward, and the harbour master's eyes fixed on it with recognition and growing terror. "You're her," he breathed, "the one they're talking about in the taverns, the drowned girl who came back. I am what your greed and cruelty made. Me." She straightened, letting her cloak fall open enough to reveal the Stormblade's glow. "Now you will help me unmake your corrupt empire. You will send messages to your contacts, telling them all is well. You will maintain your routines, but you will do it all under our watch. And if I refuse?" Astrid smiled, and in her smile was the promise of dark water closing over one's head, of chains dragging down into endless depths. "Did you know that drowning feels like burning? That the lungs scream for air until they finally surrender and draw in the sea instead?" "I do. I remember every moment. Would you like to learn that lesson firsthand?" He broke, as she knew he would. They always broke when they saw the truth of what she had become. Within hours, messages were sent, arrangements were made, and the map, with all its secret markings and hidden routes, was rolled up and stored safely away. As they left the harbour master's office, the old woman touched Astrid's arm. "The sea's memory is long," she said, "but now they will remember you too. They will remember, and they will fear." Astrid looked out over the darkening harbour, feeling the tide turn beneath the ships. Fear is just the beginning. Soon they will learn that justice, like the sea itself, reaches everywhere in the end. The Scold's chisel sang against the stone, each strike releasing tales into the salt air. Around him, a crowd gathered in the harbour market of Hedeby, watching as images emerged from the granite. A girl falling into waves, a crown of lightning, ships burning on a wine-dark sea. The stonecutter's hands moved with fierce precision, guided by stories that had spread from port to port like wildfire. "They say she walks on water," a merchant whispered, watching the tale take shape. "That storms follow in her wake like faithful hounds." "I heard she turned an entire crew to ice," another added, their frozen bodies still standing at their posts when the ship drifted into Northumbria. The Scold paused in his work, running weathered fingers over the fresh-cut runes. "Truth is stranger than rumour," he said, his voice carrying the weight of witnessed wonders. "I saw her myself in Kingsport. She came walking out of a midnight storm, her eyes burning like the aurora. The harbour master's office was found empty the next morning, his maps gone, his logs filled with the names of every slave trader he'd ever dealt with. More figures gathered as he worked, sailors wearing good luck charms, merchants clutching their guild rings nervously, former slaves with hope kindling in their eyes. The saga stone grew beneath the Scold's hands, becoming more than mere record. It was becoming prophecy, warning, and promise all at once. "She frees the captives," an old fishwife declared, pointing to the emerging image of broken chains. "My sister's child was taken by raiders last spring. 2 weeks ago she returned home, speaking of a woman with stormfire in her eyes who shattered their shackles with a blade of lightning." The Scold nodded, adding details to the stone. The transformed ring of authority, the pearl's glow beneath the skin, the way the sea itself seemed to bend to her will. Each cut of his chisel released another fragment of the growing legend into the world. "The traders fear her," a ship's captain said, his voice low. "They've doubled their guards, changed their routes, but she finds them anyway. It's like she can smell slave ships on the wind, track them through the deepest fog. She has help," a dock worker added. "They say she's building a network of her own. Former slaves, reformed raiders, common folk who've had enough of the trade. They call themselves the Storm's Children." The Scold's chisel struck deeper, adding these new details to the stone. The crowd pressed closer, each person straining to see their own version of the story carved into history. But it was a young girl, her dark eyes wise beyond their years, who spoke the truth they all felt. "She's not just fighting the traders," the girl said, touching the fresh-cut image of breaking waves. "She's fighting the very idea that people can be property, that some lives are worth more than others." "Ma," the skald paused again, studying the child's face. "You've seen her too, haven't you?" The girl nodded, pulling back her sleeve to reveal a bracelet made from a broken chain link. "She freed our ship 3 nights ago, but before she let us go, she made us promise something. Not just to remember what happened, but to make sure others remember too. To spread the word that the sea has taken sides." The stonecutter's hands moved faster now, adding the final details. The way her mother's comb had become a crown of sorts, how the storm blade left trails of lightning in the air, the growing army of the liberated who followed in her wake. With each image, the legend grew more solid, more real. "They say she's going after the traders' conclave," a merchant whispered, fear and awe mingling in his voice, "that she knows where they gather when the moon is dark." "Good," the fishwife spat. "Let her send them all to the bottom." But the skald knew better. As he carved the final runes, he spoke the deeper truth that all legends must carry. She's not just bringing vengeance, she's bringing change, the kind that reshapes the world like storms reshape the coastline. The saga stone stood, completed as the sun touched the horizon, its images catching the last light like fire. Already people were making copies, sketching the scenes onto parchment, committing the runes to memory. The legend would spread, as all true legends must, carrying with it both warning and hope. For some, it was a promise of justice too long delayed. For others, a threat of retribution well earned. But for all who saw it, the saga stone carried one undeniable truth. The seas would never be the same again. Not while the girl with stormfire in her eyes sailed their waters. The pendant caught moonlight like captured lightning, a simple disc of bronze marked with a breaking wave. In Astrid's hands, it hummed with the same power that coursed through. Her blood, each piece forged from chains, melted down in stormfire. She held it up before the gathered crowd in the hidden cove, former slaves and reformed raiders alike watching with hungry eyes. "This is not just a symbol," she declared, her voice carrying over the sound of surf. "It's a promise. Wear it, and you become part of something larger than yourself, something that will reshape these waters forever." The old woman from the steps stood beside her, sorting the pendants into small piles. "Each one carries a spark of her power," she explained in her honey-thick accent. "Not enough to call storms, that gift is hers alone, but enough to recognize each other, enough to share warnings, to coordinate our efforts." One by one, they came forward to receive their pendants. A former slave from the southern lands, her back still scarred from the lash, but her eyes bright with purpose. A ship's navigator who had turned against his captain after witnessing one too many atrocities. A fisher girl whose sister had vanished. On a raid-darkened night, each took the bronze disc with reverence, feeling the subtle warmth of magic within. "The pendant will grow cold in the presence of those who trade in lives," Astrid explained. "Warm when fellow resistance members are near, and should you need to call for help." She touched her own pendant, sending a pulse of power through the network. Every bronze disc flared briefly, drawing gasps from their new owners. "How many others wear these?" asked the navigator, studying his pendant's intricate markings. "Hundreds now, more each day." Astrid smiled, and in her smile was the promise of gathering storms. "We have people in every major port from Northumbria to the Baltic. In harbors where slave ships once docked freely, there are now eyes watching, waiting, reporting." "The eyes," old woman nodded approvingly. "Already the traders feel the noose tightening. They trust no one, suspect everyone. Their own paranoia becomes our weapon." A young man stepped forward, one of the first she had freed from the sea-wolf. "Tell them about the codes," he urged, "about how we're organizing." Astrid gestured, and patterns of light appeared in the air. Secret signs worked into everyday objects. A piece of rope tied just so on a dock post means a slave ship was sighted. 3 shells arranged on a market stall, worn of guild informants. Nearby, a particular song sung in a tavern calls our people to gather. The fisher girl's hands moved unconsciously, practicing the signs, and the pendants let us recognize each other without words. More than that, the old woman added, they mark you as under her protection. Already there are stories of slave hunters backing away from those who wear the wave mark, fearing to draw her attention. But remember, Astrid's voice turned stern, we are not just a force for destruction. Anyone who wears this pendant takes an oath, not just to fight the traders, but to help their victims, to provide safe harbor, to guide people home, to help them rebuild their lives. She touched her own pendant, and again the network lit up, bronze discs glowing like stars in the darkness. We are building something new here, a web of protection spread across the seas. Every freed slave who chooses to join us makes that web stronger. Every trader who turns against their former masters adds to our knowledge. The navigator cleared his throat. The traders' conclave approaches. That's why you're gathering us now, isn't it? Astrid's eyes flashed with stormfire. Yes, in 3 days, when the moon is dark, the guild's leaders will gather to plan their next season of misery. They think their location is secret, think their precautions are enough. She smiled, and it was the smile of winter waves against rocks. They're wrong. The pendants pulsed again, this time with an echo of her fierce determination. Around the cove, backs straightened, chins lifted as her certainty flowed through the network she had created. Wear these with pride, she told them, but wear them with responsibility too. Each pendant carries not just my power, but our shared purpose. Together, we will break the chains of the slave trade, link by link, ship by ship, until the very idea of owning another human being is washed away, like footprints in the sand. The old woman began distributing the remaining pendants, her weathered hands, placing each one like a seed being planted. The sea's memory is long, she reminded them. But now we add our own memories to its depths. We become part of its story. As the last pendant found its new owner, Astrid felt the network come alive, hundreds of points of light connected by invisible threads of power and purpose. The storm was no longer hers alone. It belonged to all of them now. The raven landed on Storm's Justice's prow as they sailed through the morning mist, its feathers gleaming with colors that had no names in mortal tongues. One of its eyes gleamed silver, the other gold. Hugin, or Munin, thought or memory, one of Odin's own messengers come to watch and judge. Astrid stood at the rail, feeling the weight of divine attention settle over the ship like a heavy cloak. The crew grew quiet, even the most hardened warriors drawing back from the bird's uncanny presence. Only the old woman from the steppes seemed unaffected, continuing to stir her pot of herbs as if ravens carrying the god's sight were an everyday occurrence. So, Astrid said to the bird, the All-Father finally takes notice. The raven tilted its head, and suddenly the air was thick with visions. She saw herself through divine eyes, a mortal wielding powers meant for the gods, reshaping the fate threads that the Norns themselves had woven. Her stormblade flickered at her side, responding to the power that radiated from the messenger. You disrupt the ordered flow of things, the raven spoke, its voice carrying echoes of Odin's halls. Slaves and masters, raiders and traded, these roles were set by fate and time. Yet you dare to break these bonds. I dare much more than that. Astrid let her eyes flare with the pearl's power, matching the raven's gaze. I dare to question why gods who feast in golden halls allow such suffering below. I dare to act where you have stayed silent. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but for once it was not of her making. The raven's feathers rippled with shadow lights, and more visions filled the air. She saw the great ash tree Yggdrasil, its branches spanning worlds, its roots drinking from wells of fate. Along those branches crawled countless lives, countless stories, all interconnected, all part of a greater pattern. You think yourself righteous, the raven said, but righteousness without wisdom brings its own kind of darkness. Already your actions draw attention from powers you do not understand. Ran's gift carries consequences even she may not have foreseen. The old woman spoke up then, her accent thicker than usual. The girl carries wisdom older than your perches. In Asgard, bird, the sea remembers when gods were young, when justice was simpler than fate's weaving. The raven's golden eye fixed upon the crone, and for a moment something passed between them, some recognition that Astrid could not quite grasp. Then both eyes turned back to her, gleaming with new intensity. There are factions, the messenger admitted, even among the divine. Some watch your works with approval, others with growing concern. Tyr, who values justice, sees merit in your cause. Thor admires your storms, though he would never admit it openly. But others, let me guess, Astrid's voice was dry as salt. The ones who benefit from the current order, the ones who receive. Offerings from successful raiders and wealthy slave merchants. Lightning crackled in the clouds above, and this time she wasn't sure if it was her power or a divine warning. The raven's feathers shimmered with increasing urgency. The traders' conclave you plan to attack, it is under Odin's protection. Ancient compacts, sworn oaths, patterns of power you cannot see. Break them, and you risk more than just mortal retribution. Astrid felt the weight of her mother's comb in her hair. The warm pulse of the liberation pendants spread across the seas, the bitter memory of chains against her skin. Then let the All-Father come himself to stop me. Let him explain to those who wear chains why their suffering is necessary for his patterns. The raven's wings spread, and suddenly it seemed large enough to blot out the sun. You would challenge the gods themselves? I already have. She raised her hand, calling a small storm into being above the ship. I was meant to die in those waters. Instead, I rose with power enough to challenge fate itself. If that's not a challenge to divine authority, what is? The bird was silent for a long moment, both eyes, gold and silver thought and memory, studying her with infinite care. Finally it spoke again. You play a dangerous game, Stormcaller, but perhaps that is what these times require. Watch for my return. The All-Father may have more to say before your battle comes. With that, the raven launched itself skyward, leaving behind a single feather that shimmered with impossible colors. As Astrid picked it up, she felt the weight of prophecy within it, the subtle shift of divine attention, focusing ever more closely on her actions. The old woman hobbled to her side, peering at the feather with knowing eyes. The gods move slowly, she said, but when they move, worlds shake. You have forced them to take sides, girl. The question now is, which sides will they take? Astrid tucked the feather into her belt beside her mother's comb. It doesn't matter, she said. I made my choice when I accepted Ran's pearl. Let the gods choose as they will. The storm is already rising. The first drop of blood fell from Astrid's nose as she called the storm. It struck the deck of Storm's Justice, and where it landed, the wood turned to salt crystal, spreading in delicate patterns like frost. The transformed captain's ring on her finger had taken on a new shade, no longer gold, but a deep crimson that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. You pushed too hard, the old woman warned, pressing a cloth scented with herbs to Astrid's face. The sea's power was not meant to be channeled through mortal flesh, no matter how blessed by Ran. They had just finished liberating their third slave ship in as many days. Each battle took more from her, not just strength, but something deeper, more essential. The pearl's power burned hotter with each use, threatening to consume her from within. I don't have a choice. Astrid's voice was hoarse from commanding winds. The conclave gathers tomorrow night. I need to be strong enough. The ring throbbed again, and more blood dripped onto the deck. This time, the crystalline patterns formed runes, ancient symbols that spelled out warnings in a language older than the gods themselves. The old woman read them with growing concern. The sea remembers, she murmured, but it also demands payment. Look at your hands. Astrid held them up in the stormlight. Veins of blue-black showed through her skin like tiny tributaries, all flowing toward the ring. Where they met the metal, they turned the color of deep water at midnight. The storm blade at her side flickered uncertainly, its lightning dimmed by her weakening grip. It's not just physical strength it takes from you, the old woman continued. Each storm reshapes you, makes you more like the power you wield. Already your tears taste of salt, your blood turns things to sea crystal, your dreams echo with tides no mortal was meant to hear. As if to prove her point, Astrid's vision swam with images, great depths where ancient creatures stirred, currents that carried memories of drowned civilizations, the weight of centuries pressing down like black water. The ring pulsed faster, drawing more of her essence into its hungry embrace. A young crew member, one of the first slaves she had freed, approached with a steaming cup. "The tea you asked for, grandmother," she said to the old woman. "Made with the herbs from your bag." The old woman nodded approval and pressed the cup into Astrid's hands. "Drink, it will help anchor you to your human self." The tea tasted of earth and roots, of things that grew on solid ground far from the sea's influence. As she drank, the visions receded slightly, though the ring continued its ominous pulsing. "Tell me truth," Astrid demanded of the old woman. "How long can I continue?" "Like this?" The crone's eyes were deep as wells. "That depends on how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice. The ring shows the bargain clearly enough. Power for essence, storm strength for humanity. Push too far, and I become like the sea itself," Astrid finished. "Powerful but inhuman, eternal but empty of warmth." She thought of the liberation pendants spreading across the waters, each one carrying a spark of her power. Thought of the networks she had built, the lives she had changed, the hope she had kindled. Was it enough? Could she stop now, retreat to some quiet shore, and let others carry on the fight? The ring answered for her, showing visions of the traders. Conclave, dark ships gathering in a hidden fjord, guildmasters plotting new routes for their human cargo, chains being forged in secret workshops. The blood from her nose fell faster now, each drop spawning new crystal patterns that spread across the deck like accusations. "There must be a way," she insisted, turning to the old woman. "Some balance between power and humanity, some way to wield the storm without being consumed by it." The crone smiled, and for a moment her face seemed to shift, showing something ancient and knowing beneath her human features. "Perhaps that is your true task, Storm Daughter, not just to break chains, but to forge a new way of carrying a power in mortal form." The ring flared once more, and Astrid felt the pearl's power surge through her veins like liquid lightning. But this time, she also felt something else. The warm weight of her mother's comb in her hair, the solid deck beneath her feet, the human concerns and hopes of her crew. Anchors in the storm. "Tomorrow," she said, watching her blood crystals. "And catch the fading light. We end the slave trade forever, whatever the cost." She touched the ring, feeling its hungry pulse. "But today, teach me more about those herbs of yours. I need to last long enough to finish what I've started." The old woman nodded and began laying out her pouches of earth magic, while above them the storm clouds gathered like destiny on the horizon. The coin rolled across the chart table of Storm's justice, leaving a trail of tarnished silver in its wake. On one side, the familiar wave mark of the liberation pendants. On the other, the serpentine seal of the Traders' Guild. Even before Astrid touched it, she could feel the discord between the two symbols, like oil and water refusing to mix. "Found it in Henrik's sea chest," reported the navigator, his own liberation pendant glowing with agitation. "Along with these," he spread out a series of coded messages, each bearing the guild's watermark. "He's been feeding them information for weeks. Every route, every safe harbor, every name in our network." Henrik had been one of their first converts, a former slave ship captain who had seemingly embraced their cause with religious fervor. He had helped design their communication codes, had suggested many of their hiding places, had broken bread with freed slaves, and sworn vengeance against his former masters. The old woman lifted the coin with a scrap of cloth, her eyes narrowing. Clever spellwork here, dark magic woven into silver, allowing him to pass our tests, fool even the pendant's power. Astrid's stormblade flared with rage, and outside, thunder shook the ship. The blood-tied ring on her finger pulsed warning, but she ignored it. Where is he now? Gone, the navigator said grimly. Took the morning watch and disappeared into the fog. But he left this. He handed over a final message, the ink still fresh. Coordinates for a meeting just hours before the conclave. The coin seemed to mock them from the table, both sides catching. Lamplight like dying stars. Astrid could taste the corruption in it, a bitter, metallic flavor that made her pearl-changed blood run cold. More than the betrayal itself, it was the implications that chilled her. How many other coins were out there? How many other supposed allies wore masks over masks? The network, she breathed. If he's compromised it. Already sending warnings through the pendants, the navigator assured her. But some of our people may be beyond reach, and the safe harbors he knew about. The old woman's voice cut through their growing panic. Look closer at his treachery. See the pattern beneath. Astrid forced herself to study the coin again, pushing past her anger to see what the crone had noticed. The guild's seal seemed to writhe under her gaze, and suddenly she understood. This isn't just about betraying us. They're using him to draw me out. These coordinates. A trap, the old woman confirmed, but perhaps not the kind they think. The storm blade hummed as Astrid traced the location on their charts. A narrow fjord, deep in hostile territory, the perfect place for an ambush. Or seen another way, the perfect place to spring a trap of their own. Send words to those we trust absolutely, she commanded, the ones whose pendants we forged ourselves, whose hearts we know beyond doubt. Tell them to spread false plans, different routes. Let Henrik's information poison their preparations. The navigator nodded, but concern still creased his face. And the others, the ones we're not certain of? Astrid's hand closed around the traitor's coin, and she felt the blood-tied ring respond, drawing power from her anger. The coin began to transform, its silver surface crystallizing into patterns of frost and fury. Feed them what we want the guild to know. Make them think. Their plan is working. You mean to go to the meeting place? The old woman said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Astrid opened her hand, revealing the coin now transformed into pure sea crystal, both sides showing only breaking waves. But not as the victim they expect. Let them think their trap is set. Let them gather their forces where we choose. Outside, the fog thickened, responding to her will. The old woman nodded slowly, reading the runes of fate in the swirling mists. The sea's memory is long, she reminded them. It remembers every betrayal, every false coin, every broken oath. And now, through you, it will answer them all. Astrid felt the pearl's power surge through her veins, felt the blood-tied ring pulse with dangerous potential. The coin in her palm shattered into crystalline dust that swirled like snow in a winter storm. Spread the word, she told the navigator, but this time we choose who hears it, who carries it, who believes it. The time for trust freely given is past. As her crew dispersed to carry out her orders, Astrid watched the crystal dust spiral away on phantom winds. Tomorrow would bring the conclave, but tonight would determine who truly stood with them, who against them, and who would learn too late the price of playing both sides in a storm. The war drum's deep voice rolled across the waters like distant thunder, each beat carrying messages that no ordinary ear could hear. Crafted from storm-hardened wood and stretched with skin from a sea serpent's belly, it spoke in the language of wave and wind, calling Astrid's forces to their final positions. Boom! The ships of her fleet moved through the fog like ghost wraiths, each captain following the drum's guidance to their appointed place. Boom! Liberation pendants pulsed in answer. Hundreds of points of light spread across the hidden fjord's dark waters. Boom! The old woman's hands moved across the drum's surface, drawing forth rhythms older than the gods themselves. "The trap within the trap is set," the crone reported, her fingers never stopping their intricate dance. "Our trusted ones are in position. The false informants carry the tales we fed them. And the betrayers," her smile was sharp as broken shells, "they think themselves so clever playing both sides." Astrid stood at Storm's Justice's prow, feeling the drum's vibrations through the deck planks. The blood-tied ring throbbed in, time with each beat, and her storm blade flickered like sheet lightning. Around her neck, her own pendant burned warm with the proximity of so many allies. "Reports from the outer markers," the navigator called softly. "Guild ships approaching from 3 directions, heavy with armed men. They mean to overwhelm us with numbers." "Let them come," Astrid answered. Her voice carried undertones of the drum's power, making the fog itself shiver. "Numbers mean nothing when you can't see to swing a sword." The old woman's rhythm shifted, becoming more complex. The drum spoke of hidden reefs and treacherous currents, of rocks that could gut a ship's belly like a fishmonger's knife. Every captain in Astrid's fleet knew the safe channels, knowledge bought with Henrik's betrayal and paid for in advance with careful planning. "They've spotted the bait," came another whispered report. "The false fleet we positioned at the fjords. Mouth, they're moving to encircle it." Boom! The drum's voice deepened, and Astrid felt answering pulses from the pearl's power within her blood. The time was near. "You remember the signal?" she asked the old woman. 3 beats like a breaking wave. Then silence, the crone answered, her hands never faltering. "When you're ready, when they're fully committed, to their attack." Astrid closed her eyes, extending her senses through the fog. She could feel the guild ships advancing, their holds packed with warriors instead of slaves, could taste their confidence, their certainty that they had lured the legendary storm wielder into a trap of their own making. The blood-tied ring grew, colder on her finger, warning of the price to come. Using enough power to control this entire fjord, to coordinate such a massive assault, it would cost her dearly. The old woman had been clear about that, had shown her the runes cast in blood crystal that spoke of transformation and sacrifice. "Your humanity," the crone had warned. "Each great working of power takes you further from what you were, closer to what the sea desires you to become." A chain reaction, Astrid knew, like the patterns of frost spreading from her blood drops, like the crystalline changes wrought by her anger. But wasn't that what she had chosen, that day in the depths when she took Rand's pearl? To become something more than human, something that could break the chains of centuries. The drum's rhythm shifted again, reporting more guild ships entering the fjord. Soon they would be fully committed, too many vessels in too narrow a space to retreat quickly. "The conclave leaders are here," the navigator whispered. "Their flagship just past the outer markers. Henrik is with them." Astrid opened her eyes, now glowing with storm fire that turned the fog around her to gleaming mist. "Good. Let them see what their betrayal has bought them." The drum's voice rose, filling the fjord with echoes that confused the guild ship's navigators, drawing them deeper into the trap. Each beat carried the weight of justice delayed but not denied, of vengeance served cold as Arctic waters. "Remember," the old woman said, her hands dancing across the drum's skin. "When the signal comes, when the trap is sprung, show them what the sea's memory truly means. Show them why the waves themselves rise up against their trade in human flesh." Astrid raised her storm blade, feeling power build with each drumbeat. The time for subtlety was past. The time for mercy was ending. Let them come with their numbers, their weapons, their clever plans. She had the sea itself as her ally, and the sea's justice was absolute as the tide. The liberation banner unfurled at Storm's Justice's masthead like a storm cloud taking wing. Woven from sailcloth, dyed with sea crystal ink, it caught what little light penetrated the fog and transformed it into rippling patterns of power. The breaking wave symbol at its center seemed to move of its own accord, and those who looked upon it too long swore they could hear the distant sound of chains shattering. The old woman's drum fell silent. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then Astrid's voice rolled across the waters, carrying the weight of divine judgment. "Now." The banner blazed to brilliant life, its light piercing the fog like a sword through silk. Answering lights flared across the fjord as hundreds of liberation pendants activated at once. The trap was sprung, and the guild ships found themselves surrounded by ghost lights that revealed their position while leaving them blind to their attackers. Gods above and below, Henrik's voice carried from the conclave flagship. How many are there? More than you betrayed, Astrid answered, her words carried by the wind itself. More than you imagined. The storm blade ignited in her hand, and the blood-tide ring pulsed with dangerous power. Above, the banner rippled with increasing fury as she drew on the pearl's strength. The price was immediate, blood crystallizing as it fell from her nose, veins darkening beneath her skin. But she embraced it. This was what she had been saving herself for. "Take them," she commanded. Her fleet moved like wolves through winter woods, each captain following paths marked by the drum's earlier guidance. The guild ships, bunched too close together in the narrow fjord, began to panic. Orders were shouted, weapons clashed, but in the supernatural fog, they struck at shadows and sometimes their own allies. The banner's light caught the guild leaders on their flagship's deck. She saw Henrik's face, pale with terror, as he realized the full scope of his mistake. Beside him stood the conclave members, merchants grown fat on human suffering, now finding themselves trapped by their own plan. "You thought to cage a storm," Astrid called to them. The banner above her writhed like a living thing, its wave pattern forming and reforming with hypnotic power. "You thought to defeat us with betrayal and numbers. But we are not just warriors, we are the sea's justice made manifest." To prove her point, she raised her storm blade and called down lightning. It struck the banner first, charging it with electric fury, then arced out to touch every liberation pendant in the fjord. Suddenly her entire fleet blazed with stormfire, each ship outlined in crackling energy. The old woman's voice rose in a singing chant, and the very currents beneath the ships began to shift. Guild vessels found themselves pulled apart by invisible forces, while Astrid's fleet moved with practiced precision through the chaos. The banner's light showed the way, creating channels of clarity in the fog that only those wearing pendants could see. "Take their ships intact," Astrid commanded as the battle was joined. "Free any slaves they brought as guards. But the conclave members," her voice turned cold as Arctic waters, "bring them to me." The banner's light caught the first clashes, sword against sword, shield against shield. But this was not a normal battle. Those who fought under the breaking wave moved like dancers following the same song, their pendants linking them in ways that transcended normal combat. They fought as one entity, one storm made of many raindrops. Guild warriors found their weapons, turning to salt in their hands when they swung at banner-marked foes. Ropes snapped, sails tore, wood warped, the very materials of their ships betraying them as Astrid's power worked through the fleet. "The sea remembers," the old woman intoned from behind her. "The sea claims its due." The blood-tide ring grew colder with each display of power, and Astrid felt changes rippling through her body. Her eyes now blazed constant stormfire. Her tears fell as salt crystals. Her blood ran with tidal patterns. The price of victory would be high, but watching the banner's light reveal justice in action, she knew it would be worth any cost. Henrik tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The conclave leaders huddled together, their fine robes soaked with sea spray, their rings and chains of office turning green with supernatural corrosion. Above them all, the liberation banner snapped in a wind that touched nothing else. Its breaking wave, promising that this night would end with fundamental change. The storm was no longer coming. The storm was here. The master key hung at Astrid's belt, a simple iron thing transformed by stormfire into something more. Every chain it touched dissolved like sugar in hot water. Every lock it approached sprang open of its own accord. As she strode across the captured conclave flagship's deck, it sang with the accumulated power of 1,000 broken shackles. "Please," Henrik whimpered, bound now with the very chains he had once used on others. "I can explain to them." Astrid cut him off, gesturing to the growing crowd of freed slaves gathering on the surrounding ships. The liberation banner still flew above, its light revealing faces marked by suffering and newfound hope. Explain to each one why you thought their lives were worth whatever the guild paid you. The old woman moved among the freed people, checking for injuries, dispensing herbs and comfort, but her eyes never left the master key at Astrid's side. It grows stronger, she observed. Each lock it breaks adds to its power, like calls to like. Indeed, the key seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat now, resonating with every chain and shackle in the fjord. Through it, Astrid could sense the locations of all who remained bound, could feel the weight of their captivity like stones in her chest. "Bring up the conclave records," she commanded. Guild officers scrambled to obey, their own fine chains of office having turned to seaweed around their necks. Ledgers and documents were piled before her, each one cataloguing the trades. Full scope. The master key responded to the papers as it did to physical chains. Where it touched, hidden messages were revealed, secret routes became clear, the entire hidden network of the slave trade laying itself bare. Names of corrupt officials, locations of holding pens, dates of planned raids, all of it exposed to the banner's unforgiving light. "Send out the word," Astrid told her captains. "Every harbor named here, every secret dock, every hidden warehouse, I want them all emptied before dawn. Use the pendants to coordinate. No one in chains greets the morning sun." The blood tide. Ring grew colder on her finger as she channeled more power through the key, but she ignored its warning. This was worth any price. Around the fjord, her fleet was already moving with practiced efficiency. Ships packed with freed slaves were setting sail for their homelands, while others moved to intercept guild vessels fleeing the battle. The old woman paused, in her rounds to study Astrid's face. "The changes speed up," she noted. "Your eyes hold more sea than sky now." It was true. Each use of the master key pulled her further from humanity, closer to becoming something else entirely. Her blood ran. With patterns of foam and tide, her voice carried the depth's echo. Her very thoughts moved like ocean currents. But there was work yet to do. She approached the huddled conclave leaders, the key humming with anticipation. These were the masters of masters, the ones who had built their fortunes on human misery. Their fine clothes couldn't hide their trembling. As she raised the key before them, "You dealt in chains," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the fjord. "Now watch them all break." The key flared with stormfire light, across the waters, across the lands, across the entire reach. Of the guild's power, locks shattered and chains dissolved. Through the key's power, Astrid felt each liberation like a star bursting to life. Hundreds, thousands of moments of freedom cascading through the night. The conclave leaders fell to their knees as their elaborate rings and chains of office crumbled to rust. Their power, built on binding others, dissolved as thoroughly as the shackles they had sold. "The ledgers show enough crimes to sink you all to the depths," Astrid declared. "But death is too quick, too clean." Instead, she raised her storm blade, calling down lightning that transformed their fine clothes to rags, their rings to coral, their boots to barnacle-encrusted stone. "You will walk the world you tried to own, marked so that all may know your crimes, and any who see you must decide for themselves, mercy or justice." The master key pulsed one final time as the last chain in the fjord dissolved. Its work here was done, but Astrid could feel other chains in distant places, could sense the phantom weight of shackles yet to be broken. "It's not finished," she said, turning to her crew. "This was their center, but not their only stronghold. While one chain remains, while one person is bought and sold, our work continues." The old woman nodded approval, reading the tides of fate in the swirling waters. "The sea's memory is long," she reminded them all, "but now it has hands to act, voices to speak, keys to unlock what should never have been bound." Above them, the liberation banner snapped in the wind, its breaking wave promising that this night's work was just the beginning. The scales of the sea materialized above the fjord's dark waters, twin bowls of crystal and foam suspended by chains of pure light. Ran's final gift, called forth by the depth of change Astrid had wrought. The old woman drew in a sharp breath at their appearance, while the liberation banner above dimmed in deference to their radiance. "The gods take notice," the crone whispered. "When mortals reshape the world too drastically, the divine must pass judgment." Odin's ravens appeared first, settling on the scale's crossbar. Then came other signs. Thor's thunder without storm clouds, Tyr's sword gleaming in the night sky, Freya's hawks circling above. The air grew thick with divine attention, pressing down like deep water. Astrid stood at Storm's Justice's prow, feeling the weight of immortal gazes. The blood-tide ring had turned to pure ice on her finger, warning of powers beyond even its ability to channel. Her mother's comb hummed in her hair, remembering older magics than the gods themselves. "Approach, daughter of the deep." The voice came from the scales themselves, carrying echoes of Ran's power. "Your actions must be weighed." Into one bowl of the scales fell images of what she had been, the slave girl thrown overboard, the human she had started as. Into the other fell what she had become, the storm wielder, the chain breaker, the one who had dared to change fate's weaving. "You have disrupted the ordered flow of power," came Odin's voice through his ravens. "Slaves and masters, their roles, were written in the roots of Yggdrasil itself. Then the tree needs pruning," Astrid answered, her voice carrying the crash of waves. "Or would you claim that the world tree feeds on suffering, that it requires chains to grow?" Thunder growled, Thor's voice joining the debate. "The girl speaks truth. There is no honor in profiting from the weak." "Honor is not the question," Tyr's presence argued. "It is about order versus chaos. She has given weapons to thralls, power. To the powerless? Where does it end?" The scales shifted, reflecting the gods' divided opinions. The old woman stepped forward, and suddenly her form seemed to waver, showing something ancient beneath her human guise. "You speak of order," she said, her accent now carrying depths of power that made even the ravens flutter uneasily. "But whose order? For centuries before your kind claimed these waters, the sea had its own laws. Ran remembers. The depths remember." The scales trembled as more weights were added. Into one bowl fell the suffering Astrid had ended, the lives she had freed, the changes she had wrought. Into the other fell the price of those changes, her fading humanity, the violence she had unleashed, the patterns of power she had broken. "You were meant to die in those waters," Odin's ravens reminded her. "Instead, you rose and reshaped the world." "Yes," Astrid let her power flare, matching the scale's divine light. "I chose to become what was needed, as did those who followed me." She gestured to her crew, to the freed slaves, to all those who wore the liberation pendants. "They chose too. Are their choices worth less than your plans?" The scales swung, considered, balanced on a knife's edge of possibility. The blood-tide ring crackled with warning frost, and Astrid felt changes accelerating through her body, mortal flesh becoming something else, something between human and divine. Then Ran's voice rose from the depths, clear as a midnight tide. "She is mine, my chosen, my instrument, my answer to centuries of prayers lost beneath the waves. Would you deny the sea its right to justice?" The scales blazed brighter, and in their light Astrid saw truth. She was no longer merely human, but neither was she truly divine. She had become something new, a bridge between mortal and immortal, between justice and power, between the old ways and what must come to be. "The scales accept this truth," the ravens declared. "You may continue your work, Storm Daughter, but know that you can never return to what you were. The price of power is transformation." "I accepted that price when I took the pearl," Astrid answered. "As I accept it now." The scales dissolved into sea foam, their judgment rendered, but their light remained within Astrid, marking her as something recognized by divine law, not quite a goddess, but more than mortal, a force of change that even the gods must acknowledge. The old woman smiled, her own ancient power showing clearly now. "The sea remembers," she said, "and now through you it acts. That is worth any price." Above them, The liberation banner snapped back to full radiance, and the freed people cheered, not for a goddess, but for one who had chosen to stand between realms for their sake. The saga tapestry grew with each passing day, its threads spinning themselves from sea foam and stormlight. Hanging in the great hall of what had once been the Traders' Guild headquarters, now transformed into a sanctuary for the freed, it showed not just what had been, but what was becoming. Astrid stood before it, watching new images weave themselves into being. Her reflection in the tapestry's surface showed how far her transformation had progressed. Hair now streaked with colors that had no names in human tongues, eyes that held depths within depths, skin traced with patterns like waves on sand. "The world changes with us," she observed, as the old woman joined her. "Look how the patterns spread." The tapestry showed it all. Slave markets transformed into free trading posts, raid-ravaged villages now protected by storm-marked guardians, former slave ships repurposed as vessels of liberation. Each thread carried memory and meaning. Each image sang with the power of lives transformed. "Here," the crone pointed to a section showing former slaves teaching others the arts of defense, of navigation, of their own power. They do not merely accept freedom, they learn to protect it. The images shifted, showing liberation pendants being forged not with Astrid's power now, but with the combined will of those who wore them. Another portion of the tapestry depicted the marked conclave leaders walking their paths of penance. Some had found redemption in service to those they once enslaved. Others had been claimed by the sea's justice, their fate a warning in ports across the known world. The master key hung now in every free harbor, its power copied into hundreds of smaller keys, each capable of breaking chains. "The changes go deeper than physical bonds," the old woman noted, indicating where the tapestry showed. "Subtle shifts in the way people thought, spoke, traded. They begin to question what they once accepted, why some rule while others serve, why power flows as it does." Astrid touched the section showing her first transformation, when Ran's pearl had changed her from drowning slave to justice's instrument. The threads there hummed with recognition, and she felt the blood-tide ring pulse in response. "Was this your plan all along?" she asked the crone. "When you spoke of the sea's memory?" The old woman smiled, and for a moment her true nature showed, clearly in the tapestry's reflection, ancient as the tides themselves, wise as the deep currents. "The sea plans nothing, child. It simply is. But when the right vessel appears, when someone proves strong enough to channel its power," she gestured to the ever-growing images, "change becomes possible." New threads appeared, showing ships sailing under the breaking wave banner, carrying not cargo but knowledge, culture, trade, freely given and received. Former raiders turned guardians, their skills turned to protecting those they once hunted. The liberation banner itself had been copied 100 times, each copy carrying a spark of the original's power. "Look there," the old woman indicated a section still forming. "The gods themselves adapt." The tapestry showed divine figures responding to prayers in new ways, listening to voices they had long ignored. Even great Odin's ravens carried different messages now, and Thor's thunder answered calls for justice as often as glory. But it was the smaller scenes that moved Astrid most. Children in formerly raided villages sleeping safely, knowing the storm watched over them. Former slaves returning home with heads held high, wearing pendants that marked them as free forever. Ships' captains teaching their crews new ways to profit through honest trade and mutual benefit. "The price was high," she murmured, watching her own transformation play out in the threads. The tapestry showed it unflinchingly. Her humanity exchanged bit by bit for power until she became something new, neither mortal nor goddess, but a force of change itself. "Worth every drop of blood turned to crystal," the old woman assured her. "Every tear transformed to salt. You opened a door that cannot be closed, showed them all a better way to be." The tapestry's edges remained unfinished, threads waiting to receive tomorrow's changes. "There is more to do," Astrid said, seeing patterns yet to be rewoven, chains yet to be broken. Always, the crone agreed. But now you do not work alone. She pointed to where the tapestry showed hundreds of light points spreading across the waters, liberation pendants carried by those who had chosen to continue the work, to maintain the new balance, to protect the freedom so dearly bought. "The sea remembers," Astrid quoted, watching new threads spin themselves from spray and storm. "And now so do they all." The storm crown materialized above the waves where Astrid had first drowned, formed from sea foam, lightning, and the essence of change itself. It hung suspended between air and water, neither solid nor liquid, a symbol of the boundary space she had come to represent. "The final transformation," the old woman said, watching from Storm's Justice's rail. The vessel had carried them back to this spot where everything had begun. "The sea offers you its last gift." Astrid stood at the ship's prow, studying her reflection in the unnaturally calm waters. The blood-tide ring had frozen solid, its purpose complete. Her mother's comb hummed with ancestral power in her hair. Around her neck, the first liberation pendant pulsed with the collective force of all its copies spread across the waters. "I'm ready," she said, though she was no longer sure who she was speaking to, the old woman, the sea, or herself. She dove. The water embraced her like a mother welcoming a child home. But this time, there were no chains dragging her down, no terror of drowning. She moved through the depths with the grace of one who belonged there, until she reached the spot where Ran had first offered her choice. The Sea Queen was waiting, her form more clearly visible now that Astrid's eyes held the same otherworldly power. "You have exceeded all expectations," Ran said, her voice carrying through the water like whale song. The pearl's power was just the beginning. You have become something new, something needed. The storm crown descended through the waters, coming to rest just above Astrid's head. Within its crystalline surface, she could see echoes of everything that had brought her here. The slave girl's desperation, the storm wielder's fury, the liberation leader's purpose. But also newer things, the wisdom learned through transformation, the balance found between justice and mercy, the understanding that true change must come from within as much as without. "The crown offers a choice," the old woman's voice reached her, though the crone remained above. "As all true power must," Astrid understood. She could take the crown and complete her transformation, becoming a new kind of force in the world, not quite goddess, not quite mortal, but something necessary. Or she could let it dissolve, return to what humanity remained to her, live out a simpler life. She thought of the saga tapestry, still weaving itself with ongoing changes. Thought of the liberation pendants glowing in harbors across the known world. Thought of former slaves teaching others to protect their freedom, of reformed raiders guarding against their former trade, of children growing up in a world where chains were meant to be broken. The choice was no choice at all. She reached over the crown. It settled onto her brow like a birthright, neither heavy nor light, but simply right. Power surged through her, but different from the pearl's raw force or the ring's bitter cold. This was the power of balance, of watching and guiding, of maintaining the new way of things. When she surfaced, she was something more than she had been, yet also exactly what she had chosen to become. The old woman, who no longer bothered to hide her ancient nature, nodded in approval. "The sea remembers," the crone said one final time, "but now it also hopes." Astrid rose from the waves. On a column of water, the storm crown gleaming with possibilities. Her mother's comb had become part of it, worked into the pattern of power and memory. The blood-tide ring dissolved into her skin, its purpose served, its lessons learned. Standing on Storm's Justice's deck, she looked out over waters that would never again bear slave ships. The liberation banner snapped proudly above, its breaking wave matched by the crown's design. She felt connected to every pendant, every freed soul, every changed life, not as a ruler but as a guardian of the new balance they had all fought to create. "There will be other battles," she said, knowing the truth of it. "Other chains to break, other changes needed. And you will be there, the Ancient One assured her, not to fight them all yourself, but to guide, to teach, to remind them of the power of choice and change. The storm crown settled into its final form, a circle of forever-breaking waves that marked her as neither divine nor mortal, but something vital in between. She had died as a slave, risen as a warrior, and transformed into something the world needed, a protector of the possible, a keeper of hard-won wisdom, a living reminder that no chain was truly unbreakable. The sea itself seemed to sigh in satisfaction, its long memory now carrying not just the weight of suffering, but the promise of perpetual change. The storm had not ended. It had become part of the natural order, ready to rise whenever justice demanded and freedom called. Astrid smiled, and in her smile was the force that had reshaped the world, not just the power to break chains, but the wisdom to build something better in their place.